Jump scares off? Yeah, okay. I don't think this game knows who it's dealing with. Ah! Okay, Jacob, relax. Just a game. It can't hurt you. Spooky's Jumpscare Mansion is a game by the same guy who made Lost in Vivo, which is one of the best horror games I've ever played, and is also another game that I've reviewed in the past, which you should watch. This is one of those call to action things that Susan is always telling me about. I assumed that Jumpscare Mansion would probably be worth the time to check out, just based on the sheer genius of Lost in Vivo, and I was mostly correct. The goal of Jumpscare Mansion is simple: survive 1,000 rooms. As you progress through the procedurally chosen rooms, things will start out cute and get progressively weirder and more dangerous. You'll find rooms like this one with the old endless hallway trick, or this one that works like a Lost Woods style memory puzzle. And you'll also be periodically chased by one of the game's several monsters for some period of time. It's a very, very simple game, but what it lacks in complexity, it makes up for in the way its mechanics are delivered. First, you'll notice that which room you are in is displayed as a giant bold number at the top of the screen. This not only contributes to the game's arcade-style design, but also adds a large amount of suspense to gameplay. You see that you're in room 55, or something, and you know you need to get to room 1000, and it seems like that's going to take you 1,000,000 years. It feels like Desert Bus, but with ghosts, and this is definitely intentional. Of course, there will be periods of time where you're running from a demon or trying to figure out some room puzzle that will be a little bit more exciting or engaging, but there will also be long stretches of the game where you are just mindlessly slamming your way through 20 rooms at a time, waiting for something to happen. It's an endurance test as much as it is a horror game. Putting this big number at the top of the screen is a lot like putting a clock right in front of your face at work. It makes time move in slow motion. When will I escape this mansion? How am I only on room 400? I feel like I've been in here for years. Please God, let me out. I never really thought about designing a game around the entire idea of good luck trying to last long enough to finish this, but it is a fun idea in this case. The challenge is that you won't last long enough to finish the game, and it's your job to push through the pain. Of course, the game itself isn't that long, which definitely helps. It would be easy for this concept to overstay its welcome if the game was 30 hours long. Speaking of length, there is an endless mode if you want to experience eternity. I wonder what the high score is. What? Okay, if I ever feel like I have nothing left to live for, I'm going to try to beat this on stream. This odd idea of making the game almost feel like some sort of ironic punishment isn't the only thing it does well, though. The monsters are also introduced in some pretty fun ways. The first one that will harass you is this goo monster. It's very slow, not intimidating, and very easy to deal with. Eventually you'll get to this big spooky computer, which has an entry on the Goo Man, but also has an entry on some monsters you haven't seen yet. First of all, the parallel to an SCP-style database here is great. For some reason, human monkey brains really just like to see things listed and cataloged. If the SCP website wasn't formatted like a listicle archive, it wouldn't be nearly as popular as it is. Secondly, this is just incredible foreshadowing. You don't want to see the ghost girl, but you know you will. And every time you find this computer, it will have a longer list of things you don't want to see. It's a good way to build suspense, and you will also come across a couple monsters and characters that aren't mentioned in the computer, so it's not a complete list of spoilers. It's just enough information to be effective, but not so much information that it ruins every surprise. Every once in a while, as you progress through the mansion, the rooms will do what I would describe as a bit. You'll be running around the same procedurally placed rooms you have been for the last 2 hours, and then, all of a sudden, you're in a fast food restaurant. This is a bit. Every time you run across something like this, you know that you're about to be introduced to a new monster. One of my personal favorites was when I just randomly stepped into the Shadow Temple from Ocarina of Time, complete with soundtrack. But the reference doesn't stop there. The new villain that starts stalking you in the labyrinth after this area is this puppet. If you're a big fan of creepypasta, you're going to recognize this puppet. I realize this entire section is a very I understood that reference type moment, which usually would be kind of annoying in a game, but Jumpscare Mansion has a very sort of sarcastic and comedic tone to it, which kind of helps it deliver stuff like this without it being annoying. Now let's get into the actual monsters themselves. The idea is that each monster will sort of have its own gimmick that makes running from it more difficult. The Goo Man is slow and easy to run from, but then the Centipede shows up and he goes fast. And then the Ghost Girl shows up and she can walk through walls, disappear, and fly, and is much more unique than the other guys. Unfortunately though, the farther you get into the game, this idea of unique gimmicks kind of starts to fall apart a little bit. For example, the Ghost Girl and the Deer Ghost are mechanically the same thing, with the exception of the Deer Ghost giving you a lecture while it chases you.
Why do you run, child? Why are you running? Why are you...
Some of them are still great though. For the puppet, you have to maintain eye contact with it at all times, basically forcing you to do the rooms backwards. And the demon that will make doors invisible, which can cause you to lose where the exit is in some rooms if you aren't paying attention. I was hoping the entire time that I played that at some point there would be a room with two monsters at once, like maybe I would need to stare at the puppet while running from the Ghost Girl at the same time or something, but unfortunately all of the encounters are one-on-one, which felt like a pretty obvious missed opportunity. I think the main reason that these gimmicks at times are copied and pasted or not as engaging is just due to the limitations of the game. Realistically, how many different ways can you be chased through a room? Speaking of the rooms themselves, I guess I should probably talk about their design a little bit. From what I understand, every time you exit a room, you enter a new one at random. The rooms themselves don't seem to be procedurally generated, but the order they show up in definitely is. This means that you're going to see some of the same rooms a lot. Some of them get annoying just based on their shape, like this one with a huge winding walkway that just gets frustrating to walk through, or this one that is some kind of a time loop where you just need to walk around in circles until the door opens. Rooms like this would have been fine as one-offs, but having them show up again and again is a little trying. But, of course, like I mentioned earlier, this game testing your patience is kind of the point, so I imagine this is a feature rather than a bug. Also, I was so hyped for what the game was going to do for Room 666, and it did nothing. For shame, what an incredible blunder. Do you guys remember that creepy-ass 666 video from like 10 years ago? The guy who made that has the best Minecraft series that has ever existed online. You all should watch that. One of the other interesting things about playing Jumpscare Mansion from my perspective was that this game came out years before Lost in Vivo, so you really get to see the prototype for a lot of the ideas that would go on to turn themselves into an entire game. Rooms like this one that have sort of the Silent Hill inspired aesthetic, monsters that can move through walls while chasing you, things like the endless hallway and the time loop room that start to get their head around the idea of a more psychological meta horror. Like I said in my last video on Shattered, it's fun to play small indie games and try to get into the head of the developer, and in this case, I got to sort of do that retroactively, which was pretty interesting, especially since Lost in Vivo is one of my favorite horror games. The description for Lost in Vivo on Steam says, "This is a game about claustrophobia," which is definitely an emerging theme in Jumpscare Mansion. Being stuck in a series of these tiny rooms does have a very claustrophobic feeling. If you want to play this game on Steam and you search for it, you'll notice that there is an original free-to-play version and a new HD re-release that costs a little bit of money. So the question becomes, what is the difference between these two? Well, the HD release obviously looks a little bit better, but the real difference that matters is the HD release comes with the Hospital DLC and another game mode called Spooky's Dollhouse. Both of these new game modes are basically separate games in their own right. The Hospital takes on a more traditional survival horror angle where you're exploring an abandoned hospital within the mansion's labyrinth that gets increasingly spooky. This Hospital game is by far and most obviously the prototype for what would eventually go on to be Lost in Vivo. It's a lot more psychological in its horror. It was also interesting to see how the mansion's room mechanics were used creatively here. For example, in this basement scene, you see the spooky ghost, and when you turn around to run and try to escape the basement, all of a sudden you find yourself in a series of procedural rooms, when up until this point you had been in a normal building with a normal layout that was easy to navigate, and you always knew which door was going to take you where. What an incredible way to just flip the game's mechanics upside down and get a panic response out of the player. Similarly, Spooky's Dollhouse is another more classic survival horror game where you carry around an extremely upsetting doll and try to figure out what the fuck is going on in this house. You're gonna be collecting keys and stuff. I'll be honest, I didn't really get that far into this one. But if you like survival horror games, you're going to like both the Hospital DLC and whatever the fuck this is. I promise. Of course, the HD remake also includes the same endless mode, but this is the version that has the high score table. So if you want to be world famous for being the first person to get to 100,000 rooms, you're going to want to cough up the money for the HD version. That more or less concludes my review on Spooky's Jumpscare Mansion. If you want to test your patience, have a few laughs, and goof around in some survival horror minigames, it's worth your time. This guy is an incredible game designer and really understands how to make something good. The HD version is probably worth the $9, especially since it goes to the funny Lost in Vivo man, but if you're absolutely broke and just want to play the base game, why not pick it up for free? This video was also sort of an experiment in a shorter video format. I'm thinking that it might be possible for me to do videos on smaller games like this one while I work on larger projects in the background. For example, right now I'm prepping everything I need for the inevitable Resident Evil 8 video, which is going to take me quite a bit of time. I figure this way I can maintain an upload schedule and still be able to put out the occasional big video like Silent Hill 4 or Cyberpunk. Let me know what you think about this plan down in the comments or something. If you want to see more videos like this one, consider subscribing. Leaving a like and a comment also really help out. And if you want to actually get notifications for my channel, you're going to have to turn on everyone's favorite bell. Down in the description, you can also find a link to my active Discord community that is full of very chill people having a chill time. And finally, you should follow me on Twitter so you don't miss any important updates. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.